So this is where I would normally film what is, at least by my standards, an upbeat introduction to the video, but I've tried for the last 15 minutes and it's just not there, and I apologise for that. I'm just getting to the end of what has been the most horrific week of my life. On Monday, my wife was taken by ambulance to hospital with a really serious allergic reaction. Paramedics were amazing and managed to bring her back from the precipice and take her into hospital, where she spent a couple of nights while I stayed here at home with our 7-year-old daughter, trying to keep strong and keep her strong. Yeah, it wasn't a good time, and I hope that it's something that we never have to deal with again, and I hope that none of you have to deal with anything along those lines. But yeah, hopefully for the rest of the video I'll be okay when I'm talking about the books, but just trying to kind of do my normal introduction, I guess. I tried and failed several times, and yeah, it's just not there, so I can only apologise for that. Hopefully, as I say, the rest of the video will, however, be at least a little bit better than this intro. But we are in June at the moment, so I'm here to talk about the books that I read in May. So I'm going to follow the normal format for the wrap-up, whereby I'll run through the stats for May first of all, and then I'll talk about the individual books that I read last month. I'll use timestamps as usual in the bar below, so you can skip ahead to the book talk if you're not interested in the stats part of it, and so forth. Once again, I'm sorry I'm not sounding my normal self, but hopefully in the next video, normal service will be resumed. So in May, I read 5 novels and 1 novella, which gave me a total of 3,026 pages at an average of 588, and the average rating that I gave these was 4.08. I had a 2.5 star, 2 3.5 stars, and 3 5-star reads, so it was a bit of a mixed bag, but overall it was a really good month, I guess. As far as the year-to-date figures go, that puts me at 13,151 pages read at an average of 517 per book, and an average rating almost identical to last month, this one coming in at 4.09. As far as series go, I've now started 10 this year, finished 1, and I haven't DNF'd any. There are 11 series that I'm up to date with. I've read all of the books that have been published so far, and there are 22 series now that I consider myself to be in the middle of, so I've started reading these, but I've not yet finished them, either because I've not read all the books that have been published, or the rest of the series hasn't yet been completed by the author. As far as the days since my last 5-star read goes, I did rate a book 5 stars on the 31st of May, so this one is coming in at 1 day. So in terms of the books that I read last month, and there is absolutely no blame attached to anyone on this, but this is a month where I put out a list of books in 4 different categories that were all books that I wanted to read, and I asked for your help to decide which book from each of those categories I should read. And in May, yeah, I read those 4 books. So bearing in mind that I did have some 5-star reads, that's good, but I also had some reads that for me were just plain disappointing. So the first one I read was from my sci-fi category, and that was Arkady Martine's A Memory Called Empire. This is book 1 of the duology called the Tex Kalani, and I buddy read this with my friend Nina, and we both had pretty similar thoughts on this one. I think she rated it a 3. I gave this one a 2.5, so spoiler for the end of this little section. This was an interesting story. It's one that obviously appealed to me because I've had my eye on it for a while. It's one that I wanted to read, and obviously I've picked up as a gift because it was on my wish list. I've picked up a copy of the book itself. The overall story itself was kind of intriguing. I liked a number of the ideas that we had in here. We're following a new ambassador who has come to the Texkalani Empire from her home system because the former ambassador from her system is now dead. So she goes there to do a job, of course, but also as a kind of a secondary goal that she has. She wants to find out what happened to the former ambassador. Part of that, I guess, is because it may well have been essentially a political assassination. So she needs to find out whether she's also going to be therefore in danger. One of the things that I did quite like about this book is a device called the Imago, which is kind of like a memory transplant device, I guess. So to use the main character as an example, the former ambassador had one of these devices, and when he died, his memories are implanted into the head of a new ambassador. So where she's actually quite young, instead of having just a short time span of experience basically to draw on, she's actually got the knowledge of a whole line of ambassadors before her that she can draw on. So it's not something that's new necessarily, but it's something that I thought was actually done quite well in this particular book. Of course, it does lead to some complications because it's only as good as the most recent kind of download or upload, whichever way you look at it, and the former ambassador was murdered, so there's at least a period of time, and for spoilers I won't go into how long that is, but there's a period of time that is not included. So although the new ambassador has all of these memories from her predecessor, some of the more important ones potentially, including why he was killed and how she can go about avoiding the same fate, she doesn't have that information. Now, one of the things that I really didn't like about this book, and which turned out to be probably the overriding factor, the number one kind of reason that I didn't like it overall, is the naming convention of the Texkalani. And because we're in the Texkalani Empire, most of the characters we meet follow this naming convention. So our main character is called Mahit, and that's fine, that's easily pronounceable. They're all easily pronounceable, but you know, it does sound at least like a name. All of the Texkalani characters have a number and then a word as part of their name, and it just doesn't sound like character names, but also some of them are really kind of silly, really, I guess, at the core of things. One of the main characters we have, I think her name is, I read it at the start of the month now and I'm trying to remember back without any notes, but it was either 3 or 6. I think her name was 3 Seagrass. And that's kind of okay, I got used to that. But then you do have some characters in here who are just absolutely ridiculous. So you've got, I'm just going to make up the numbers here, but you've got things like 15 Penknife and 7 Helicopter, and I think there was one that was something along the lines of 36 All-Terrain Vehicle. And it just really didn't sound right to me. They didn't sound like characters, and I really struggled to kind of get myself engrossed into the world that's been created because of this naming convention, which really spoiled it for me. There was a fair portion of the book that I really struggled to kind of get my head around, to really follow, because I wasn't enjoying what I was reading. I couldn't get invested in it. And it led to me just kind of waiting for the end of the book, really, not to find out what happened and how we got there, but just so I could put it down and move on to the next one. So, as I said, this one I gave 2.5 stars for. It wasn't the most enjoyable book that I've read. In fact, it's probably one of the least enjoyable ones I've read in recent memory. But I'm still glad that I did read it, because at least now I know for myself what it was all about. Even though I didn't like it, it's still one that I've been able to tick off my list at least. So following that, the next one up was from my, I think this was from my kind of TBR veterans category, ones that have been on my list for a long time and I've just not got around to reading yet. And the winner chosen was Kings of the World by Nicholas Eames. This is one that always gets recommended to me anytime that I said that it's one of the options, or even if I haven't, if I'm just looking for recommendations. This comes up so many times. Pretty much everybody loves this book, and I'm not in that group. So this one, I did like the idea of it. I thought for the overall story, the characters, the plot, the world, everything actually worked quite well, but the execution of it for me didn't. The one thing that I didn't like in this, and it's one which really kind of pains me to say, I guess, but the one thing that I didn't like about this book was the humour. I love some good humour in my books, but this one just did not work for me. It was too much like a combination of Terry Pratchett and David Gemmell, and I love both of those authors, and I love Discworld and I love Draenei, but I don't want to read an amalgamation of the two of them, and that's what I felt I was doing here. So overall, it wasn't my favourite book. It was a real disappointment for me purely because it had kind of been built up so much and I was so looking forward to it. So it was a bit of a letdown. I really did enjoy the kind of the final battle. I thought that was really well done. And part of that, I guess, might have been because there was a little bit less of that humour I found within those final few chapters when that battle's taking place. So that was a pretty good redeeming feature of this book for me. Now, another thing that I really didn't like about this book, actually, I was reading it quite slowly because I was struggling with the writing in it and couldn't quite get into it. So once I'd finished A Memory Called Empire, which I listened to the audiobook for, I thought I'll try out the audio for Kings of the World, see if that can help speed things up for me. And I really wish that I hadn't done that because I absolutely hated the audio for it. I listened to a couple of chapters kind of just to be sure, and then I moved back to reading, well, a combination of the physical book and reading it on my Kindle. For the audio, I found that I really didn't like the overall voice. So not only the actual narration itself, but the individual voices given to each character within the book. I really felt that instead of listening to an epic fantasy, it was more like a Scooby-Doo animation. The voices were almost comical. It really did sound like kids' cartoon kind of villains that I was listening to, rather than the band and all of these other characters in this world. So overall, yeah, very disappointing for me, but again, another one that I'm glad that I finally got round to and chalked off my list. This one was one of my 3.5-star ratings for the month. Then it was my series continuation category, and this one, like Kings of the World, this one had a clear winner that I was absolutely expecting at the start of it. It was Words of Radiance, Book 2 of the Stormlight Archive by Brendan Sanderson. This is another one that I did the audio for because I found the graphic audio. I do not like the Michael Kramer and Kate Redding narrations. I just cannot get on with them. This is a really negative sounding wrap-up video, so yeah, sorry about that. But for the rest of it was absolutely fine though. So I don't like the Kramer and Redding narration. I found the graphic audio, a friend had that and lent it to me, and I absolutely adored it. It was pretty much a revelation for me. I loved the story, but the performance was enough to elevate it just that extra level for me as well. So this is now one of my favourite books of recent years, and a large portion of that, I will say, is probably down to the enjoyment as a result of listening to that graphic audio. So I'm not going to talk about this one too much because I did review Words of Radiance, and I'll link in the cards up in the top corner there, so you can go and view that one after this video if you haven't seen it, and if you want to know my thoughts in a little bit more detail. But it's been something like 10 years since I read The Way of Kings, so I got myself a little reminder. I found a summary of that one online and read through the key points of The Way of Kings, and then just dived straight in to Words of Radiance. And the story and the characters in the world are so vast and so well done because, I mean, these are big books. Words of Radiance on my tracker I've put down as 1,088 pages. The Way of Kings, again, is about 1,000 pages, so there's a lot more page count to kind of build this world. So even though it's only book 2 in a series, we've already got sort of 3 or 4 books worth of world building and characters and plot development compared to where we would be in book 2 of any other series. So it was really well done, really enjoyable, and I don't know yet whether it's going to be June or July, but whenever it is, I'm really looking forward to diving into Oathbringer to continue this series. So Words of Radiance was a really easy 5-star read for me and one of the highlights so far of the year. So that was the last of the books that I've got a physical copy of, and the last of the books that came from my viewer poll was the self-published category, of which the winner was Winds of Strife by U.G. Gutman. So this is another one that I've been looking forward to for such a long time, and I really, really love the cover. And one of the reasons that I really wanted to read it was to see whether I enjoyed it enough to pick up a copy so I could have that cover in my collection. taken up a recommendation of a couple of different people. I listened to the audiobook for this one, and the narration in it was fine. There was one little thing that I really had an issue with, which was a character called Glitter, who was abbreviated by her friends to Glit, and it just didn't quite sound right. It didn't sound like a G in enough of the instances that I heard it. So that was a little bit off-putting for me. But overall, the narration was absolutely fine. I didn't have any issues with it, really. But the story itself, I couldn't get into it. I don't know what it was. And I finished it, I think, about 2 weeks ago, something along those lines. And I've tried since then to kind of put my finger on it and find out what it was that I didn't just gel with this book. And I still have no idea. The overall concept of it, the world building, the characters, they were all fine. They just, together, I don't know, it just didn't work for me. This isn't something like Kings of the Wild where everything worked except for the humour. It definitely wasn't the writing in this one, which was absolutely fine, so that's not the reason. I just really do not know what it was. But I guess not every story is going to click with you, and this is just one that didn't click with me as much as I wanted it to, as much as I feel that it probably should have done. It just didn't do it, and I really don't know why. So I've struggled with this one because I haven't written a review for Goodreads yet, as I like to do for every book that I read. I haven't done a dedicated video review for it. I'm still trying to put together my actual thoughts, as you might be able to tell by the amount that I've already rambled without really saying anything much about the book itself. So it's a real difficult one for me, and I don't know what more to say about it. I did give it 3.5 stars. I really, really wanted it to be a 4 and above, but 3.5 was as much as I felt that I could do for this one. Next up, I was given a review copy of A Prelude to Ashes by Thiago Abdella. This is a prequel novella to the first book in the Ashes of Averin, which is A Touch of Light. Now, for anyone who's watched my review on it, I kind of feel bad about A Touch of Light because it's a beautiful book and it's a good story, and I just didn't have the best of times with various aspects of it. I was ill whilst I was reading it, which I'm not going to blame it on that, but I don't know if it did have any impact on my enjoyment of it because obviously I wasn't in my kind of normal frame of mind whilst reading it. But I did my review for it and I said that it wasn't the best book. I was a bit disappointed. There were questions that I felt were left unanswered, which I do stand by, of course, because the book hasn't changed since I read it. But my feelings toward the book definitely have changed, and as it's kind of sank in and as it's kind of simmered in there, I find that I have been going back and thinking about the book, which is always a really good sign. So I think I gave it 3.5 stars, a 4-star rating on Goodreads it was rounded up to, but I would definitely say I now consider it to have been a 4-star read. Now, A Prelude to Ashes is set beforehand. I think it's 100 years, and it's kind of a bit strange because various of the characters are long-lived. So even though it is quite a bit before A Touch of Light, we do have a lot of the same characters in there. And it's quite good actually because some of the relationships that I didn't feel were developed in A Touch of Light, they get centre stage in A Prelude to Ashes. So I really enjoyed that aspect. It gave a lot of backstory, it gave a lot of history to the kind of the conflict, I guess, that you see in A Touch of Light. But more than that, it really builds on the characters. The central one is Adrian, who's one of the 3 characters in A Touch of Light. The other 2 main characters in A Touch of Light aren't featured in this novella. So we focus on Adrian and the people around him. And I really enjoyed the story that we had here. I thought it was a really good introduction to the world. I've said before that I do like these prequel novellas as a means to introduce yourself to the author's writing, but also to introduce yourself to the world, the storyline, the characters, and so forth, depending on obviously how close to the main series the prequel novella is. But this one is a definite good example of it. Pretty much everyone I've seen who has read it says that it should be read before A Touch of Light, and I would agree with that because I think your knowledge of some of the characters that you have in this novella and what they go through, I think will be of great benefit when you come across those characters in A Touch of Light. So overall, I really enjoyed this. I feel that it definitely elevates the series overall, The Ashes of Averin. And if you haven't read A Touch of Light yet, I definitely recommend picking this one up first so you can get yourself nicely grounded in this world. And if you have read the novel, pick this one up as well so you can expand your knowledge of the world. So it's a definite recommendation whichever way you look at it. I really had a good time with this, and it's one that, as a novella with a slightly different kind of rating scale, I guess, I gave this one 5 stars out of 5. And then my final book of the month was another audiobook. This one was just a random pickup, the perks of being a mood reader, I guess, but this time it really paid off for me. I read Along the Razor's Edge, which is book 1 of the War Eternal by Rob J. Hayes. I've not read any Rob J. Hayes yet. I do have Just There by My Head, Spirits of Vengeance, the third of the kind of standalone books in his Mortal Techniques series, but the only thing that I've read is a short story, Century Blade, which is set in that world, and I didn't really get anything from it because it's too short. It was about 20 pages and basically it did nothing for me. This one though I picked up because it was a freebie on the Audible catalogue, and I'm really pleased that I decided to give it a whirl because I absolutely loved it. I adored our main character, Esker. I thought that she was a breath of fresh air, really, although maybe you wouldn't call her a breath of fresh air because she is absolutely foul-mouthed. But I really loved that. It really worked for me. It wasn't kind of overdone. The bad language in here, I think, really set the scene and really suited the situation and the character that I was becoming to know as I read on. Now, the audiobook for this was absolutely superb as well, so that definitely elevated my enjoyment of it overall. I'm not going to go into too much detail because I do plan to, hopefully when I'm feeling a bit more like myself, I do plan to do a dedicated review for this one, but I really loved Along the Razor's Edge. There are a few people in my Discord who started reading this as a kind of an unofficial buddy read in June, and everyone I've seen so far is pretty much on the same page as me, really loving it, really raving about Esker, and I agree with what a couple of people have said. Esme, for instance, says that Esker is a new favourite character, and absolutely so. That is deserving praise. I really loved this character, and I can't wait to move on and read more in this series. You could probably guess then for this one that I gave Along the Razor's Edge 5 stars. So that's my kind of disjointed, not quite my normal flavour May wrap up. Once again, I'm really sorry that I'm not feeling quite my normal self at the moment, but hopefully you still got the information about the books that I read that you come here looking for. Let me know in the comments down below how your month went, and if you had any standout books that you really loved and want to recommend. That's it for me today though. I hope to see you again in another video soon. Until then, as always, take care of yourselves and your loved ones. Read some good books. Bye for now.